Hi, my name is Astrid, and I'm the award-winning author of Aspiring, the first part in my retelling of the Grimm brothers' tale, Brother and Sister. Welcome to my video series, Drawing Back the Veil, an analysis of the siblings' tale, where I go into detail on what I wanted to achieve with this two-part series and why I wrote it in the first place. When I was 12, I began my journey as a writer, and one of the things that drove my desire to write was how much I was bothered by the overwhelming whiteness in my favorite genre, which is fantasy. At that time, fantasy was decidedly a white male affair, and that didn't reflect the reality of my life growing up in post-apartheid South Africa. I loved the adventures and I adored the magic, but weedy white boys just didn't make for protagonists I could relate to. Add to that elves, dwarves, hobbits, all the good guys and even most of the bad guys were pretty much all white people. I really wanted that to change, and I had some ideas on how to go about it, so I started writing. Fast forward 20 years and the scene has changed a lot, and characters of color are now all over the fantasy genre. They are still few and far between, but they are there, and more are coming. I'm glad for this change, and I hope to inspire a new generation of writers to be more diverse and inclusive in their writing. The siblings' tale came to me in my teens when I read Ella Enchanted by Gail Carson Levine, but I only sat down to write it after finishing high school when I was 19. I wanted to showcase a lesser-known fairy tale. At least it's not as well known in English. Brother and Sister is a quite beloved German tale, but hardly part of the canon of fairy tales in the English-speaking sphere. It also happened to be my childhood favorite. I love the fact that this particular fairy tale doesn't end with marriage. You see, to me, the fact that the story continues after the girl marries the king was very important because I didn't like the subconscious idea that the other classic fairy tales give me of the story ends with marriage. Like, there's nothing to life after that. I did love the feel of Ella Enchanted, the way it's told in first person and the very charming setting. I wanted to recreate that in my own retelling, especially the feeling I got. But I also knew I couldn't tell the entire story in first person because of certain events that happen at the end of Brother and Sister. For that reason, I decided to split my narrative into two. I wrote the backstory in first person and then wrote the actual retelling of Brother and Sister in third person. Then I reconciled this discrepancy by inventing the character of Viola Ilarian, an archivist who discovers a manuscript which is related in Aspiring, and then who completed the narrative of historical events, which I later published as Becoming. Aspiring unfolds with Elizabeth, a 14-year-old girl who is daughter of a noblewoman and a common man, in a universe that's much like 17th century Europe in terms of culture and mores. I wanted my setting to reflect the origins of the original tale and my personal connection to Germany. To be more precise, I should say Bavaria, because that's where my father is from. And it was that part of Germany that I got to know as a child. The Alpine setting seemed the most natural scenery for my story, especially because the Alps are tied to my own nostalgic memories of visiting my grandmother on vacations, and we just spent the time hiking in the mountains. Although, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't really want a fully European culture. And so this is why I started looking for more diversity for the fantasy world I was creating. That's why I drew on my experiences from traveling in the Andes and learning about Peruvian culture. Vendale, the world I created for the siblings' tale, became a fusion of Bavarian and Andean cultures, where I kind of split the upper classes as being more closely modeled on 17th and 18th century European society and the Moors, while the peasant classes are more influenced by the Andean and Middle Eastern cultures that I have some knowledge about. The humans in this world are all dark-skinned, aligning with my original reason for writing. The plot of Aspiring follows Elizabeth's struggle to become a magic user. Her mother passes away unexpectedly, leaving Elizabeth entirely alone. She is of mixed birth, which means she is looked down on by the aristocrats, who have a monopoly on magical practice. And she's determined to achieve what she believes she's meant to do. So she starts teaching herself magic as best she can. At the same time, Elizabeth falls in love with someone well above her station, but who doesn't seem bothered by that. Elizabeth, however, is very much aware of that difference in status. She and Richard end up tiptoeing around each other, struggling with the complexities of their relationship and the fact that they can't actually be out in the open about it. Their relationship is marked with misunderstandings and their difficulties to communicate. Meanwhile, a coven of witches who actually caused Elizabeth's mother's death in a plot to overthrow the royal line and take over power in the kingdom are trying to ensnare Elizabeth because they'd like to use her power for their purposes. To avoid giving away a key part of the plot, I'm not going to go into detail more about Aspiring, other than to point out that Elizabeth ultimately fails to achieve her goals in this particular part of the story. You see, by the end of the book, she is forced to flee, and her brother Edward decides to go with her in an attempt to calm his own conscience, because he realizes he wasn't there for his sister when she most needed him. Becoming, part 2 of the siblings' tale, follows the two as they find a way to return to Vendale and set things right. On the way, they discover that the elven people have been misrepresented by humans, and that the witches have also had a hand in obstructing the elves' ability to work and maintain the balance of magical forces. So Elizabeth's time spent with the elves in the forest helps to ground her magic, and it gives her the knowledge she needs to be able to overthrow the witches. But she hesitates to return because of certain decisions she made just before she left Vendale. And it takes the king's hunting trip through the forest to shift her perspective and open an opportunity for her to return and to re-establish her relationship with Richard. Once back in the thick of things, Elizabeth is forced to prove her worth and has to overcome her own limiting beliefs. She also continues to struggle with her relationship, but she's much better now because she's more mature. This series of videos will cover the themes I wanted to engage with when I wrote The Siblings' Tale, and I'll be dedicating at least one video to the following topics. The question of belonging, drawn from my own experience of marginalization and not fitting in, discrimination and racism, the complexities of relationships, which include siblings' relationship between Elizabeth and her brother Edvard, the love relationship between Elizabeth and Richard, and the relationship between Elizabeth and her father. I do also look at other topics like abuse in the family setting, marriage for love versus marriage for convenience or other external reasons, and friendship. There is also the arc related to transformation, how we can transform our lives to achieve success. And this is grounded in certain principles such as deciding for something one wants to achieve, not giving up no matter what, and practicing forgiveness. I will also take some time to look at the power of choices and how it can affect results in our own lives. I look forward to sharing everything underlying the siblings' tale in this YouTube series. The next video will be dedicated to questions of belonging and finding one's place in society. Thank you so much for watching.